This video is on how to field strip and clean the SIG Sauer P210 Carry. This is not a complete disassembly video. We're only going to break it down as far as you need to go for basic maintenance and cleaning. To get started, you'll need a few things. CLP, that stands for cleaner, lubricant, and protectant. A cleaning rod with a handle that allows the rod to spin freely. You want the rod to be able to spin so that the board brush can spin within the rifling. If you were to just push it straight through and the board brush was not spinning, you may not get a thorough clean. Cleaning patches, 9mm size bronze board brush, 9mm size jag, 9mm size bore snake. You can use an old t-shirt, but I prefer the rags made specifically for gun cleaning because they don't leave lint. Cotton swabs with an angled tip, vinyl gloves, and this is optional, but I do recommend a cleaning mat like this one. It keeps your equipment and small parts and springs from rolling off the table. You can get all this from your local gun store, and I'll also leave links to everything in the notes below. So let's get started. If I'm going too fast, feel free to pause and rewind. If I'm going too slow, feel free to fast forward. I always start out with a clear and empty weapon, but of course I'm going to double check. Press the magazine release button there, and drop the magazine. Pull the slide back and keep it back by pushing up on the slide catch lever. Now make sure you're clear, and don't do that by just looking down into the magazine well. Actually tilt the gun over and look inside the chamber to make sure you're 100% clear. Now you can release the slide by pressing down on the slide catch lever and let the slide go home. So if you look on the right side of the gun, you'll see a button just above the trigger guard. That's the other side of the slide catch lever. You can need to press that in order to get the slide catch lever out. So the SIG Sauer owner's manual states to retract the slide approximately 5mm to the rear, but if you don't know exactly how much 5mm is, you can just start pressing on the slide catch lever, the button on the right side that I just showed you, and as you're pulling back on the slide, you'll feel the slide catch lever give a little bit. That's when you know you're at the right spot and you can continue pulling out the slide catch lever. I'm going to move that aside and continue removing the slide. So this recoil spring guide rod assembly is a little bit different. You want to twist it and pull it out at the same time. So this piece right here was facing down and I had to twist it this way in order to remove it. And this is as far as you need to go for a basic field strip. You have the frame, the barrel, the slide, the recoil spring, and the magazine. You don't have to do this in any particular order, but today I'm going to start with the frame. So add CLP to the nylon brush and start scrubbing all surfaces inside and out. We'll make sure all gripping surfaces are completely dry when we're done. Use the small end of the nylon brush to get into the rail channels and any other hard to reach spaces. Once I feel like I've loosened up all the carbon and fouling with a brush, I'm going to add CLP to a cotton swab and go through it in fine detail. I'm going to use the angled tip on this cotton swab to get into the rail channels. You'll see that the first cotton swab comes out really dirty. Just keep putting CLP on a clean cotton swab and running it through the rail channels until they start to come out clean. The rails and rail channels are high friction areas. I want to make sure they're completely clean and they're running smooth. Once I've gone through the entire frame in fine detail, I'm going to wipe off all the excess CLP with this microfiber rag. The easiest way to remove the CLP from the grips is wrap a rag around it and squeeze. Now that the frame is clean and dry, it's time to lubricate. I'm going to add a light coat of CLP to all metal surfaces and a medium coat of CLP to the rail channels and any other area that shows signs of metal on metal wear. Now start on the slide. Add CLP to the brush and start scrubbing all surfaces inside and out. This is the breech face. You want to be careful when you get to this area. You don't want to leak COP down into that little hole that the firing pin comes out of. But this area does get really dirty, so you're going to have to scrub it really well. Earlier I was calling the rails on the frame rail channels, but those are actually the rails, and these are the rail channels. So anyways, I'm going to use the small end of the nylon brush to get into these rail channels on the slide. And this small piece here that looks like a hook is the extractor. It's easy to overlook this area right here, so use the small end of the nylon brush to get behind the extractor. Now that I have all the carbon and fouling loosened up, I'm going to add CLP to a cotton swab and go through it in fine detail. Now wipe off all the excess CLP. Now that the slide is clean and dry, I'm going to add fresh CLP to a cotton swab and relubricate. I'm going to add a light coat of CLP to all metal surfaces and a medium coat of CLP to the rail channels and anything else that shows signs of metal on metal wear. And here's an example of something that shows signs of metal on metal wear. I'm just going to add a couple of drops of CLP to the outside of the slide and wipe it down with a rag. Okay, now the slide is cleaned and lubricated. Let's move on to the recoil spring and guide assembly. Add CLP to the brush and start scrubbing in between the coils. Now scrub the guide rod. Now I'm going to wipe it clean with a rag. Now I'm going to clean the recoil spring by rolling it over the rag. When you put the recoil spring back on the guide rod, this flat part on the left goes on first. If you look closely, you can see that the opposite end looks a little bit different. So here's another shot of the flat part of the recoil spring that goes on the guide rod first. Now that that's clean, let's move on to the slide catch lever. This part only takes a minute. Add CLP to the brush and start scrubbing. Then wipe it clean with a rag. Now I'm going to relubricate by adding a small amount of CLP and smoothing it out with a cotton swab. I'm going to move on to the barrel, add CLP to the nylon brush, and start scrubbing the outside. The feed ramp gets really dirty. You're going to have to scrub that really well with the brush. If the nylon brush isn't cleaning the feed ramp well enough, you can use a bronze bore brush and just kind of lightly scrub it. And just a reminder, make sure you're using a bronze or nylon brush. You don't want to use any kind of abrasive metal. Now I'm going to attach the bronze bore brush, add CLP. I'm only going to push it through the bore in one direction, chamber in to muzzle in. So I had to push it through, remove the brush, remove the rod, reattach the brush to the rod, and start the process over again. I do this because I don't want to push the dirt out and pull it right back in. Kind of like sweeping the floor. You don't sweep back and forth because you'll just make a mess. You want to push the dirt out in one direction. And you don't want to be lazy and just push the rod and brush through without the handle, because remember, the handle allows the rod and the brush to spin freely within the rifling. I've attached my jag. Now I'm going to add CLP to a cleaning patch, put it over the jag, and push it through the barrel from chamber in to muzzle in. You'll see that the first patch comes out really dirty. Just keep repeating this step until the patches start to come out clean. Okay, and this looks clean enough for me, so now I'm going to move on to the bore snake. At the end of the string, you'll see a brass weight. Take a look at it and make sure it says 38, 9mm, 357, or 380. All those calibers have the same diameter. Drop the weighted end through the chamber, pull it through. You can get the bore pretty clean just using cleaning patches, but if you want it to be perfect, run a bore snake through it a couple of times. This is why it's kind of hard to pick up on camera, but that bore is spotless. There's not even a speck of dust inside. It looks better than it did when it came from the factory. The rifling is completely clean and it looks like black glass inside. Now I'm just going to give it a final wipe down and move on to the magazine. The magazine isn't something you need to disassemble every time you clean unless you dropped it in mud, dirt, or sand or something like that. In most cases, you just need to give it a basic clean and wipe down of the exterior. If you do need to take it apart, just press that button at the bottom of the floor plate. The floor plate slides off. Then you can remove the insert, the spring, and the follower. Clean everything with CLP, but don't leave anything wet. Make sure you remove all the excess CLP before you reassemble it. Then you can just put it all back together in reverse order. So for basic cleaning of this magazine, I'm going to make sure not to leak CLP into these witness holes here, or round cout holes, whatever you'd like to call them. And I'm also not going to leak CLP down underneath the follower here. I'm going to add a small amount of CLP to the brush and scrub the outside. Now I'm going to wipe off all the excess CLP. You don't want to leave CLP on the magazine because it may attract dirt and lint. Alright, it looks good. Everything's clean. Time to reassemble. Put the barrel back in the slide just like that. Now remember, the flat part of the recoil spring goes onto the guide rod first. And remember how we had to twist it to get it out? Well, you got to do the same thing to put it back in. So reinstall it. Muzzle end goes in first. Then twist and turn the guide rod just a little bit until it goes flush with the top of the slide. It should look just like this. I'm just going to move the slide around to try to give you the best view possible. So if it looks like that, you're good to go. If it's not on right, you're going to know it when you try to put the slide back on the frame because it'll get hung up. And if that happens, just take a look at the recoil spring and guide and make sure it's centered perfectly. Now I'm going to light up the rails on the frame with the rail channels on the slide and pull it back. And this is where you're going to find out if that recoil spring and guide is centered perfectly. You may have to adjust it just a little bit to get the slide back on. Pull the slide back onto the frame until you match up both of these holes right here. That's where the slide catch lever is going to be reinstalled. I'm going to use my weak hand to hold the slide in this position while I use my strong hand to reinstall the slide catch lever. I felt it snap in, and I can also see that button on the right hand side of the frame protruding out. I can see that it's flush on the left side, so everything's good. So now I'm going to do a function check. I'm going to work the slide. Now I'm going to pull the trigger, the hammer's going to drop. I'm going to keep holding the trigger, work the slide again, and release it. Pull it again, the hammer's going to drop. So everything's good. Now I'm going to insert a magazine and make sure it locks back on an empty chamber. And it does, so everything's good to go. Congratulations, you're done. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.